As I stood in the kitchen, arranging the final touches for our son's graduation celebration, my phone buzzed on the counter. The sound was sharp and insistent. It was from Greg, my husband of 22 years. At first, I thought it was a simple message to confirm the time we were meeting at the venue later that day. But as I unlocked the screen and saw the attachment, my heart skipped a beat. Divorce papers. The sharpness of the text message, cold, abrupt, and final, almost knocked the breath out of me. It felt like the floor had fallen out from beneath me. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the words blurring together as my mind tried to process them. How had we gotten here? How had everything I thought was stable, secure, and real turned into this divorce papers? Delivered via text, as if it were just another mundane task like sending over a grocery list. I stood frozen, staring at my phone. In the background, I could hear our son Jason laughing with his friends outside, all excited for what was supposed to be a happy day. The proud moment we had both worked toward. But instead of feeling joy, all I felt was a dull ache, a sinking feeling in my chest. My stomach twisted into knots. Greg had always been distant, but this was the breaking point. This was the moment where everything shattered. I had spent years in the background of his life, supporting him, our family, our children. I put my career on hold to raise Jason and his younger sister Emma. I had always been there. In fact, I had been too there. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe Greg had been slowly growing resentful of my devotion. Or maybe there was someone else, someone who had captured his attention. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to breathe through the wave of emotions crashing over me. The anger, the betrayal, the sheer disbelief. How dare he? How could he have done this? The last time we had spoken, he had been his usual self. Distant, yes, but not someone who would so casually throw away everything we had built together. I had given so much of myself to our marriage. I had sacrificed my dreams, my passions, my independence. I had built my identity around being Greg's wife, Jason, and Emma's mother. It was always about them, never about me. But now, in this moment, it felt like I had been nothing more than a placeholder in his life, an accessory he could toss aside when he was ready for something new. The text had no apology, no explanation, just the papers. And a single line that read, "I think it's time we end things. I'll be out of the house by tomorrow." It felt like a slap to the face. And then the realization hit me. This wasn't just a shock, it was a betrayal. A deep, gut-wrenching betrayal that had been festering beneath the surface for who knows how long. As I stared at those words, a cold rage started to build inside of me. I wasn't going to let him ruin this day. Not today, not on our son's special day. I would not allow him to control this moment, and as much as the betrayal cut through me, I couldn't let it break me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and put the phone down. I wiped my hands on a towel, smoothing out the creases of my clothes. I was going to finish what I had started. I would not let Greg's decision steal this day from me, from our son. Not today. But as I carried on with the preparations, I couldn't help but wonder, what now? What happens when the man you thought you knew becomes a stranger? How do you rebuild when your world has been turned upside down in an instant? The hours leading up to the graduation ceremony were a blur. I continued to arrange flowers, set out the food, and make sure the decorations were just right, all while my mind raced 1,000 miles per minute. Greg had been distant for months, maybe longer. I had noticed the small signs, the late nights at the office, the sudden business trips that never seemed to make sense, and the way he'd stop talking when I walked into a room. But I never thought it would come to this. Never thought he would throw everything away so easily, like I was just a footnote in his life. But the papers, that text, it was the undeniable proof that whatever we had, whatever I had believed we had, was over. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep going along with the script he had written for us. He'd made his choice, and now I would have to make mine. Jason was excited, running around the house with his friends, laughing and carrying on as if everything was perfectly normal. I watched him from the kitchen, my heart swelling with pride. My son. My beautiful boy who had worked so hard to get to this day. He didn't deserve the turmoil that was unfolding. I couldn't ruin his moment. Not like this. But as I carried on, a feeling of anger began to bubble up inside me. How could Greg do this? How could he disrespect everything I had sacrificed, and the audacity of it all, to send divorce papers while I was knee-deep in preparations for our son's graduation? It was cruel. I had been the one who had held everything together. I had been the glue that kept our family functioning. And now he was just throwing it all away. No explanation, no remorse, just a text message with a cold final document attached. As I set the last plate of food on the table, I forced myself to focus. The ceremony was soon. Greg would be there, of course, but I wasn't sure how I was going to look at him. How was I supposed to stand next to the man who had just ripped my heart out and act like everything was fine? The phone buzzed again, another message from Greg. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, debating whether I should open it. I had to know what was left to say. I hesitated, then swiped the screen. His message was brief. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to say this in person, but I'm done. I'm not coming back." The words felt like a slap, but there was no question about it, he was done. The finality of it hit me hard. I had spent my entire adult life with this man, building a family, a life, a future, and in the blink of an eye it was over. I put the phone down. I couldn't read another word from him, not now, not ever again. I had to focus on Jason. This day wasn't about Greg. It was about our son, the culmination of all the years of hard work and sacrifice. I was done letting Greg control my emotions. I was done being a doormat. I would not let him ruin this moment for me. The ceremony started soon, and I walked out to meet Jason, trying to push the ache in my chest away. Greg had already arrived, standing near the back of the crowd, looking uncomfortable as he caught my gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I simply nodded and turned my attention back to our son, who was grinning from ear to ear. I held my breath as Jason walked across the stage to receive his diploma. This was his moment. Nothing was going to take it away from him, not even Greg's betrayal. My hands were shaking, but I clapped proudly, my heart swelling with love. As the ceremony ended, Jason came running to us, his eyes wide with excitement. He looked at me first, then at his father. "Mom, Dad, look, I did it," he said, beaming. I smiled at him, feeling a warmth spread through me. He had no idea what was going on between Greg and me, and for that, I was thankful. For his sake, I would keep my emotions in check, at least for today. Greg stepped forward to congratulate him, but I could feel the tension in the air. He wasn't the same man I had married, the man who had stood beside me, promising to support me through thick and thin. This version of Greg, this man who would throw everything away so callously, felt like a stranger. "Great job, Jason," Greg said, his voice flat. He didn't even look at me. I held my tongue. For now I was the perfect mother, calm, collected, proud of my son. But inside, a storm was raging. Later, as we gathered for dinner, I could feel the unease between us. The cracks in our marriage were so wide now that it was impossible to ignore them. I was done pretending, and I wasn't going to let Greg continue this charade. I needed to know the truth, and I wasn't going to sit back and let him walk all over me any longer. As the evening wore on, I felt a shift inside of me, a quiet determination. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to let Greg's betrayal define me. I would rebuild. I would rise from this, and I would find my strength again. The truth, as painful as it was the beginning of something new, and I was ready to embrace it. The next few days were a whirlwind. The moment the graduation celebration ended, I went into autopilot mode, handling every detail of our family life as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was anything but composed. Each time I looked at Greg, a part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers. But I knew the truth already. His actions had said more than any words ever could. The house felt colder, emptier. Greg's presence was still there, but it was like we were two strangers living under the same roof. The tension was thick, suffocating. I kept my distance, giving him no reason to engage. Every day I walked by him as if we were roommates. The silence was louder than any argument we could have had. But that didn't last long. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, he came into the kitchen. I felt him before I saw him, his shadow falling across the doorframe. I didn't look up, keeping my focus on the chopping board. "I know you've been avoiding me," Greg said, his voice softer than usual. He sounded almost defeated, as if he was expecting some kind of reconciliation. I didn't respond. The last thing I wanted was for him to think this was something we could talk through. What had he expected for me to beg him to stay, to cry and plead no? I wasn't going to let him dictate my emotions anymore. You don't have to avoid me, he continued. I didn't want it to happen like this. I turned to face him, then my heart pounding in my chest. My gaze locked with his, but I held my composure. No, Greg, you did want it to happen like this. If you didn't, you would have come to me. You would have told me the truth, but instead you texted me divorce papers while I was getting ready for our son's graduation. You decided that I was worth so little that I didn't even deserve a conversation. You didn't even have the decency to face me. He flinched as if my words struck him harder than he had expected. I could see the guilt flash across his face for a split second, but then it was gone, replaced with the same cool indifference that had become so familiar over the last few months. You're right, he admitted quietly. I didn't handle it the right way, but I thought you'd be okay. I thought you would understand. Understand? I echoed, my voice rising. How could I possibly understand? I sacrificed everything for you, Greg. I put my dreams, my career, everything I was aside for our family. And this is how you repay me? By tossing me aside like I don't matter. My voice cracked on the last words, but I quickly regained control. No, I don't understand. But I'm done trying to. Greg looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there like he was waiting for me to break, for me to beg him to stay. But I didn't. I'm not asking you to stay, Greg. I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. You've already made your choice. You don't need to explain yourself to me anymore. What you do now is between you and your conscience. With that, I turned back to the stove, refusing to let him see the tears threatening to fall. Greg didn't say another word. He stood there for a moment as if weighing his options before walking away. The sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway was the final nail in the coffin. It was over. He was leaving, and I was finally letting go. The days that followed were filled with a strange quiet. Greg spent more time out of the house, no longer pretending to be invested in the family or in me. He made it clear through his absence and silence that his decision was final. But it was also clear that he was running from the consequences of his actions. But I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I spent the next few weeks reflecting on everything: our marriage, the years we had spent together, and most importantly, what I had allowed myself to become. I had let Greg define me for far too long. I had built my life around his needs and desires, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of my own shattered identity. The hardest part was realizing how much of myself I had lost along the way. I had become so entangled in the life we had built that I forgot who I was without it. But now I had the chance to rediscover myself, to find my own path, to be who I was meant to be. It wasn't easy. I had moments of weakness where the pain would hit me like a wave, knocking the breath out of me. But each time I fell, I got back up. Slowly but surely, I began to reclaim the parts of myself that Greg had taken for granted. I started taking small steps toward building a new future, one that was mine and mine alone. And then one day I realized something: I was stronger than I had ever been. I had survived the worst of it, and I wasn't going to let this betrayal define me. I was going to rise from it. I was going to be better, stronger, and more independent than I ever thought possible. I looked at myself in the mirror one night, not recognizing the woman I saw, but in a good way. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't someone to be pitied. She was a fighter, a woman who had been through hell and come out the other side. And that woman was just beginning to rise. It had been a few months since Greg left, and in that time I had started to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, but I had learned that true strength comes not from what others expect of you, but from what you are capable of when you finally decide to stop waiting for approval. I had focused on my children, of course, Jason and Emma. They had been the bright spots in the darkest moments, and their support meant the world to me. They didn't fully understand everything that had happened between Greg and me, and I was grateful for that. They deserved to feel the joy of their own accomplishments, without the weight of our family's breakdown hanging over them. Jason had been my rock. He had always been the kind of son who noticed the smallest shifts in mood, the subtle cracks in the facade. He was the first to notice when I started waking up earlier, when I began to take back some of my own space, my own time. He never questioned it. Instead, he smiled and said, "You seem happier, Mom." It was all the validation I needed. Emma, on the other hand, had been a bit more distant, as if she was unsure how to approach me now that the world she once knew had changed. But slowly she came around. We spent time together, just the two of us, going to the movies, having dinner at our favorite restaurant, laughing like we used to before the weight of our family drama had taken its toll. And then there was the unexpected blessing. I had found a part-time job at a local art gallery, something I had always wanted to do, but had never given myself the chance. I had always been an artist at heart, sketching, painting, creating, but Greg's ambition for success and his constant push for a perfect family had made me bury that part of myself. I had poured all of my energy into making his dreams come true, suppressing my own. But now at the art gallery, I found a part of me I thought I had lost forever. The first time I picked up a paintbrush again, I was filled with a sense of relief. It was as though I had opened a door I didn't even realize had been locked. Painting gave me a sense of peace, a quiet place to let my emotions flow. I could create something beautiful from all the chaos, from the pain of betrayal, from the loss. And in doing so, I found healing. But even though I was moving forward, there was always that nagging thought in the back of my mind, the truth I had yet to confront with Greg. I had gone through so many emotions since he left: anger, sadness, grief. But now I was at a point where I was ready for closure. I had grown. I had changed. I was no longer the woman who had stood in that kitchen shaking with rage, holding divorce papers in her hands. I had reclaimed my strength, and I needed to face him. Not for him, but for me. It was a Tuesday when I finally decided to call him. He picked up on the third ring, his voice tense, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Hello?" His voice was guarded, as if he expected me to lash out. "Greg," I said, my own voice steady. "I think it's time we talk." He was silent for a moment, the air heavy with uncertainty, before he spoke again. "I didn't think you'd ever want to talk to me again." "I don't know what you thought," I replied, "but I need to hear the truth. I need to understand why." "I'm not sure there's much to explain," he said, his voice barely audible. "I wasn't happy. I felt trapped." "Trapped," I repeated, almost laughing. "Trapped in a life you chose. Trapped by the family you built. You think that justifies what you did?" There was another long silence. I could almost hear the weight of his regret pressing against him. "I wasn't thinking clearly," he muttered. "Clearly," I repeated. "No, you weren't. You acted out of selfishness. You didn't think about the damage you'd cause. You didn't think about me or our kids. You didn't even think about the vows you made." "I know," he said, sounding defeated, "and I'm sorry. But I don't know how to fix it now. I I was weak." I didn't respond for a long time. The apology, if you could call it that, felt hollow. I wasn't looking for an apology anymore. I had healed beyond that. But it was still important in some way for me to hear him say it. To hear him admit his failures, even if it didn't change anything. "You can't fix it," I finally said. "What you broke can't be fixed. But I'm okay with that now. I've moved on. You should too." There was a long pause on the other end, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I did. I'm sorry." And for the first time in months, I realized that I truly was done. Done with the past, done with the pain, done with the lies. I had let it all go. I had found peace in moving forward, and Greg's apology didn't define that peace. I didn't need him to fix anything. What I needed was to move on, for myself, for my children, and for the woman I was becoming. "I know, Greg, I know." And with that, I ended the call. It felt final. It felt like a weight had lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. That evening, I went back to the art gallery, looking at the work I had done over the past weeks, pieces that had been born from my struggle, my growth, my healing. I stood in front of one of my favorite pieces, a colorful swirl of blues and yellows, my hands covered in paint, my heart open to the future. I didn't need Greg anymore. I didn't need the past. I had everything I needed right here: the strength to move on, the courage to let go, and the ability to build something beautiful from the wreckage of my life. And that was just the beginning.